You got Grace the contacts, right?
Yep, they're both online. They're
Great.
streaming.
This meeting is being recorded.
Do you want me to cut off my video and audio?
Yes, while we're not on, please. Let's go.
And we're about to begin in 3, 2, 1.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Dee Loggeson, Executive Secretary for the Committee on the Present Danger China and Executive Director for Save the Persecuted Christians. These two coalitions are jointly sponsoring today's program and our current campaign at repealthedeal.org. A video of this webinar will be available there and on the coalition sites within a day of the program's conclusion. For today's webinar, select the Q&A from your navigation bar to make comments or ask questions, and open up the chat for links that we will share. Our moderator today is Frank Gaffney. Frank is the president for the Institute for the American Future, vice chair for the Committee on the Present Danger China, president of Save the Persecuted Christians, and host of Securing America on Real America's Voice Network. Frank, let's get started in 3, 2, 1.
Thank you, Dee. Welcome, everyone, to this very special program of our Committee on the Present Danger China, which is for the purpose joining forces with another organization with which I'm proud to be associated, as is our colleague Dee Loggeson, Save the Persecuted Christians. Both of these are estimable organizations of individuals committed to the cause of freedom, whether it is in the context of what the Chinese Communist Party is doing to imperil it, or what others, not just the Chinese Communist Party, but others around the world are doing to endanger and brutalize and otherwise harm Christians simply because they follow Jesus Christ. They are, of course, just one community that is being persecuted for their religious beliefs. They're by far the most numerous, however, with some 380 million of them being heavily persecuted around the world, according to Open Doors. And the Chinese communists are contributing mightily to such persecution, as we will be discussing in the course of today's program. What makes this one particularly special, of the many of these webinars we have conducted over the past 2 years or so, I think it is well over 200 of them, is that we have a short documentary that we are going to air in its entirety, drawn from, among other things, the previous program jointly sponsored by the committee and the coalition on this same topic that was conducted in the run-up to the Catholic Cardinals Conclave, at which they, of course, debated the future of the Catholic Church and specifically elected a new leader of the Church to contend with myriad challenges, both this particular religious community as well as Christians more generally, and of course people of other faiths are very much afflicted. We're going to be discussing afterwards, following the showing of this documentary, comments from colleagues, one of whom appeared in the documentary, one of whom did not, as well as two who were able to be with us in person. So we have a multifaceted, I guess one might say multimedia production today. and I couldn't be more excited to share with you a film directed by our friend Frank Penico. I had the privilege of being the executive producer of it. It is about 24 minutes long. We will be airing it, as I say, in its entirety as a way of setting up really the conversation that needs to be had now. As the film was originally prepared prior to the selection of Pope Leo XIV as the new pontiff of the Catholic Church. I have a little introduction that makes clear that it is now relevant to the moment at hand, which is, what is this new Pope going to do? Will it be, as we hope, adopt a new pro-freedom policy with respect to the Catholic Church in China and its posture as a result regarding religious freedom worldwide? We are going to introduce, after the film, the two colleagues who gave us a video concerning aspects of the situation in which we find ourselves now, post-conclave, and in the run-up to an extraordinarily important annual event this year. That is the International Day of Prayer for the Roman Catholic Church in China on the 24th of May. And we'll be talking a little bit about what we are sponsoring in the way of prayer events and a novena, as it's called in the Catholic tradition, before this, before this 24th of May event takes place. It should be a very interesting webinar. I'm delighted you're with us, and I'm particularly grateful to Steve Bannon and Grace Chong of the War Room Pandemic program on Real America's Voice, also to Rob Sigg and Parker Sigg, the leaders of that wonderful network on which I'm very proud to have a program as well, Securing America. And also our thanks to Epic Times, specifically to our friends there, Jan Jekielek and his team, for also simulcasting this program. It's a great service, we like to think, to the people we all serve, that this is as widely available as possible. So with all of that, let me simply say, welcome to Repeal the Deal, the Vatican's hidden deal with the Chinese Communist Party. At this point, we should roll the tape.
I am a devout Catholic, been a Catholic my whole life. I'm actually practicing abstinence for well over 16, 17 years. I attend Mass every day and say the Rosary. I felt it very important to speak out about what's going on right now as far as dubious things, the secret China deal. There's a sense of urgency to get this documentary done. So we'll be looking at some footage from Zoom meetings, some footage from webinars, as well as interviewees. I truly hope the Catholic leadership will tear up this secret China deal, which no one knows the content of. They need to stand with Jesus and not with President Xi. Scripture states, take no part of unfruitful works of darkness, but expose them. And I feel that this secret deal with China is an unfruitful work of darkness.
With the death of Pope Francis on April 21st, 2025, the surviving members of the leadership of the Roman Catholic Church began a series of meetings to assess the state of their institution and ultimately to select a new pontiff, thanks in part to an outpouring of criticism from faithful Catholics, and others, one issue loomed large in those discussions: the secret deal between the Vatican and the Chinese Communist Party, initially agreed in 2018. This film, which was first released shortly before the Cardinals' conclave began on May 7th, tells the story of how this deal came to be, what is known about its still undisclosed terms, and the damage done in its wake to the Church in China and worldwide. The evidence presented to the Cardinals about the consequences of legitimizing a Chinese communist regime determined to destroy all religions, but especially the Roman Catholic Church, with devastating impacts on her clergy, faithful, doctrine, traditions, infrastructure, and sacred texts, was clearly traumatizing. So much so that it appears to have doomed the papal candidacy of the one-time frontrunner, the secret deal's architect and principal defender, Cardinal Pietro Parolin. In other words, Cardinal Robert Prevost owes his election as Pope Leo XIV in part to the revulsion felt about the Vatican's diabolical deal with the Chinese communists. It appears that a majority of his peers, as well as millions of believers in China and globally, and countless others committed to or yearning to enjoy religious freedom, now expect the new pope to repudiate and repeal this abomination. At the outset of his papacy, the new pontiff has an opportunity to make a fresh start, to demonstrate his commitment to lead a Roman Catholic Church truly in the service of Jesus Christ, and not one that serves, quite literally, an antichrist figure named Xi Jinping. This film is dedicated to all those who call on Pope Leo XIV to repeal the deal.
The recent funeral of the Pope that occurred was the first time in the history of the Church and the existence of the PRC that we actually had Chinese bishops attend a Pope's funeral. And in this case, these were bishops that were handpicked by the Chinese Communist Party. And so this is really strange that there are estimated 10 to 20 million Chinese Catholics in mainland China. And it's clear that the Rome, like Washington, D.C., like Brussels, they see access to a large market of people, power, position, access to funds. And so I think what Rome has done is said, well, we will make this deal with the Chinese Communist Party in order to have unity. As one of I have some contacts down in Rome said to me in an email, said it's an important sign for Rome that shows the unity of the Chinese Catholic Church. So it's for them, for those that are running the show in the Catholic hierarchy down there in Rome, what they want to be able to say is that they're whole and that they've got their church together. And so they were willing to say, yeah, okay, Beijing, if you want to have the final say, we'll go ahead and do that. That opens up a Pandora's box of other kinds of relinquishment of moral authority. So there's a great controversy going on inside the church, as we, I think, all are seeing in the news about who's going to be selected and whether they're going to be someone out of the conservative side of the Catholic faith, or is it going to be somebody that's like the previous pope and, will kowtow to Beijing. And if that's allowed to happen, Beijing will effectively have the ability to not just monitor these 10 to 20 million Catholics and know where they're at and be able to silence them if they want or purge them if they want, but they'll also have an inroad into the Chinese or into the Catholic strategy and the Catholic's mission inside Rome. And so they'll start leveraging, like we've seen over the last several, decade of this last pope.
The founder of the People's Republic of China, like all committed Marxists, was absolutely hostile to organized religion and was determined when Mao Zedong took power in 1949 in China, over all of China. He was determined to stamp out all religious faith in China, which he described as one of the four thick ropes binding the Chinese people. Well, he was going to bind the Chinese people in a different way with the thick rope of communism. But he set out to destroy, especially Christianity, which he regarded as a foreign religion, even though it had been in China for over 1,000 years, and specifically Catholicism, because Catholicism is not only, in his view, a foreign religion, but one that was led by a foreigner, specifically the Pope in the Vatican, in Italy, in Europe. That project lasted 7 years, during the course of which many Catholics were tortured, some were martyred, and the project to eliminate the Catholic Church in China over those few years failed miserably. And so Chairman Mao at that point backed up and decided to, instead of destroying the Catholic Church, to set up a faux church, the Patriotic Catholic Church, in order to infiltrate Catholicism, control Catholicism, and co-opt the Catholic Church from the inside. That project, of course, continues to the present day with the Catholic Patriotic Church. But it failed in the 1980s and 1990s. I know it failed because in 1995, I was in Hong Kong, and I met with the then Papal Nuncio to China, Monsignor Filoni, later Cardinal Filoni. And we had a long meeting about the state of the Catholic Church in China. And he told me that the Catholic Church in China was united. It was not divided between the Patriotic Church and the underground church. He astonished me by saying it was united. And I said, what do you mean, Monsignor? He said, well, all of the Catholics in China are loyal to the Vatican. Nearly all the priests are as well, he said, and with the exception of 2 bishops, all of the bishops in China have been recognized by the Vatican as legitimate, licit bishops. He said the only 2 exceptions are the Bishop of Shanghai and the Bishop of Beijing, because they've made too many compromises to the Chinese Communist Party. But as for the rest, the church is unified, he said with a smile. Well, that was the happy state in the late 1990s and the early 2000s. And then in 2012, 2 things happened that dramatically changed this happy situation. Pope Benedict XVI backed up, and elected in his place was Pope Francis. The second thing that happened was that a new leader of the Chinese Communist Party emerged, Xi Jinping, who is virtually an ideological clone of Mao Zedong, who, like Mao, hates religion and wants to stamp it out, replacing it with the cult, the ideological cult of communism. And so he began to tighten the screws on the Catholic Church, at the same time that Pope Francis began to seek some sort of concordat, some sort of agreement with the Chinese Communist Party. In his naivete, in his embrace of socialism, in his desire to have some sort of formal agreement with the Chinese Communist Party, he sent to China the worst possible emissary to negotiate such an agreement. People will be astonished to learn that he sent the disgraced, defrocked ex-cardinal Theodore McCarrick to China to represent the Vatican in its negotiations with the Chinese Communist Party over the future of the Catholic Church in China. Now, I can't imagine a worse emissary. As we all know, McCarrick was a pedophile. He had been told by Pope Benedict to withdraw from active ministry. He ignored that order, even at the time, and once Pope Francis emerged as the new Pope, he came out publicly and openly and was sent by the Pope as his emissary to China.
Through the course of his 12 years, Pope Francis promulgated radical ideas, contentious innovations in his papal edicts. But the most controversial and, in fact, the most destructive action of this papacy is the secret deal with the Chinese Communist Party. And this covert agreement, initiated, negotiated, executed, and renewed 3 times by Pope Francis, has ushered in a whirlwind of persecution. The specifics of this covert deal are unknown, except that it involves the appointment of Catholic bishops in China. I believe it was kept secret because the Vatican knew that if the terms of the deal were obvious, it would send Catholics into a full-throated fury. because it would be proven that the Vatican had sold out the faith to the communists, and Francis would be exposed as a communist sympathizer. Xi's CCP swiftly deployed this secret agreement as a cudgel against Catholics and Christians to force them to submit to the Communist Party's anti-religion directives. On display for the whole world was to see the further disintegration of Catholicism in China, this time with the complicity of the Vatican. And the net effect of this secret agreement resulted in a huge uptick of demonstrable violence, widespread destruction, and religious persecution against Catholics and Christians by Xi, the Vatican's trusted bilateral partner. And immediately, the words of Cardinal Zen rang true. He called this secret deal a suicide pact with the devil, a shameless surrender, a perverse deception, a betrayal, a sellout to deliver the church into the hands of the enemy. The ink was barely dry on this agreement when international religious freedom NGOs around the world began to report of an immediate uptick in religious persecution, harassment by the CCP, directly related to the secret Vatican agreement, stating the persecution of Chinese Catholics has not decreased. If anything, it has intensified.
Sinicization, what is it? The goal of sinicization is to turn religious adherents and institutions into perfect vessels of the CCP, root out all perceived non-CCP influences which the government often disparages as foreign, including the Vatican, and subdue ethnic minority communities through forced assimilation and the eventual extermination of all faiths, as it is forbidden to teach youth in China any belief but communism. Sinicization and its so-called patriotic values include Chinese socialism, radical national unity, and support for the CCP and its leadership. It underpins every major government regulation for religious organizations. Rather than making it better for Catholics in China, the Vatican's deal combined with restrictive laws and regulations emanating from the party have sealed their fate. Catholicism in China is fast-forwarding towards extinction.
It appears to have bought the silence of Pope Francis throughout his pontificate. This was a pope who spoke out regularly on issues of injustice and persecution and conflict around the world. But the one country, the one corner of the world that was conspicuous by its absence was China. He never once spoke about the genocide of the Uyghurs, about the, well, he mentioned it once in passing, but he never spoke out strongly on the genocide of the Uyghurs, the persecution of Falun Gong, the issue of forced organ harvesting, and certainly the persecution of Christians. I assume, trying to regard Pope Francis charitably, that his intentions behind the deal were to see an improvement in religious freedom and an improvement in the lives for the Catholic Church in China. But the reality is the result of this deal has been the exact opposite.
The religious freedom and certainly religious persecution has increased and religious freedom has gone down, whether we're talking about Catholics, Protestants, Falun Gong practitioners, Tibetans, Uyghurs. I mean, you know, this whole accelerated, you know, genocidal process against the Uyghurs, you know, basically started since that time. Just simply, of course, correlation isn't necessarily causation, but that's the actual reality of what's happened to essentially every other faith group that seeks to be independent of the regime. And, you know, and the CCP, it's, I think, universally regarded as the greatest violator of religious freedom in the world, in all a myriad of ways. And that's really saying something, considering the contenders for this distinction. It knows deep inside that it is not legitimate, okay? And certainly the Chinese people know that it's not legitimate. The CCP, aside from power, okay, there's one thing that it craves the most, and that is legitimacy. It violently oppresses its people. It drives its economy on the backs of at least half of them. We could go on and on this. You can see what it did with its World Trade Organization access. It got the legitimacy that it was going to be a free trader. And what did it do? It never, followed the rules even once, and basically used the rules to attack anyone who would try to prevent it from basically doing whatever it wanted to. And here we are today in this current situation. So you can kind of see the impact of what legitimizing the CCP does. It craves legitimacy. It doesn't have that legitimacy. It will use this deal, right, as a way to as part of its United Front Department work to propagandize overseas communities and say, look, actually, no, we're legitimate. We work with the Vatican. There's no issue there, and so. This, you can imagine what an incredibly pernicious effect it had.
In choosing the next pope, the Catholic Church faces a momentous decision, not just for the 1.4 billion Catholics around the world, but for everybody who loves liberty. Now, in 80 years, the Catholic Church has gone from an organization under Pope Pius XII, who issued a decree against communism in 1946 that explicitly called for excommunication of any Catholic who had anything to do with communism whatsoever. We saw how Pope John Paul worked with Prime Minister Thatcher of Britain, President Reagan of the United States, to work against Soviet communism. The Catholic Church has always been a bulwark against communism. It's basically in the Church's DNA. Very shortly after Francis became Pope in 2013, he set up an organization called Dialogue, the Transversal Dialogue Project. It was explicitly about Christian Marxist dialogue. The church that was basically given legitimacy by Pope Francis in a secret deal early in his papacy, renewed several times, makes this Chinese Communist Church effectively the official Catholic Church of China. This official state-sponsored Catholic Church works under the direct control of the Chinese Communist Party's United Front Work Department. This is the organization for spreading Chinese Communist Party influence across the world. It works with Chinese friendship associations, business groups, cultural groups, political parties all across the world, many of them non-communist, but all targets of Chinese Communist Party influence. And now, the Catholics of China are being drawn into the orbit of this organization. Millions of legitimate Chinese Catholics are now going to be used as puppets of the CCP. Their respectability, their influence is going to be used by the CCP to spread its tentacles across the world, into the Catholic world, into NGOs, into the United Nations, into human rights organizations. The respectability of the Catholic name is going to be used to spread CCP ideas across the globe. I'm not qualified to debate cardinals on matters of theology, but I do understand the very important concept of sins of omission. It is not enough just to be a good Catholic or to be a good Christian. It is also incumbent to stand against evil when it's presented. It is a sin of omission not to stand against the church's enemies, not to stand against evil when confronted with them.
It's also important to note that what's made in China doesn't stay in China. The CCP's wolf clerics travel the world wearing the robes of a priestly lamb to entice the unsuspecting and naive to worship their god, Xi Jinping.
Xi Jinping is now enforcing his avowed goal. We must solemnly reject religion. We must not believe in religion. He is doing so with the collaboration of the Vatican.
When we look out on the world today, there is a beacon of hope for the Catholic Church. I don't believe it resides in Rome. It resides in the hearts and minds of the Catholic faithful around the world, who themselves have been diligent, most especially in America, for believing in not only the faith, but in the freedom that is required to defend that faith. And it is my sincere hope that in what we have to do with this project, that not only are we exposing the dangers of the Chinese Communist Party, but we're elevating the most important part of the church. And the most important part of the church are the Catholic faithful. And the defenders of the faithful reside substantially here in the United States, because it is we who believe in human freedom. And if freedom is going to be defended anywhere in the world, including for those members of the church, it will really emanate from what is being discussed here in this country, and hopefully have influence on what transpires both in the current conclave, but in the operations of the church throughout the world.
American citizens are encouraged to use our Align Act, which will let you communicate with President Trump and your elected members in Congress. Encourage them to make statements opposing this secret deal. And everyone, Americans and foreigners, are encouraged to sign our petition at change.org. Both actions are on the homepage at repealthedeal.org. We can do this together, but it's going to take everybody, Catholics, Christians, and believers in other faiths, to join in persuading the Vatican to repeal the deal. God bless you.
I want to thank everyone who participated in the making of that short film. I hope that it moved you, as it did us, to not only have a refined understanding of what has happened, yes, in secret, during the papacy of Pope Francis, and what it has meant to many millions of people of faith in communist China, and not least what it might mean for the rest of us if the church fails under its new leadership to make a fundamental course correction, resuming its historic role as a leader in religious freedom, as well as standing with those Catholics, yes, especially, but others as well, against the various forces arrayed for their destruction, or at least their subordination to some secular power. We're privileged to be associated with, I think, so many of these wonderful experts and activists, especially at a moment such as this, when their leadership and our following their lead in urging the Pope, the newly elected Pope, Leo XIV, to heed the warnings here, and I believe the sentiment of the majority of cardinals who elected him to this exalted position. We're going to take stock of what exactly is now before us, with several others. Three of them you've heard from just now, one you have not. That would be the Honorable Robert Destro, a former Assistant Secretary of State under the first Trump administration, with responsibility for human rights, democracy, and other matters of personal conscience. He has been a leader in that space, notably in his long service as a professor of law at Catholic University. We've asked Robert in a pre-recorded video that is part of the program that will be running tomorrow on our Securing America show, to address the Chinese Communist Party a mortal threat to religious freedom at home and abroad. Let's go to the video now.
I think the best place to start really is in Tibet, where the Chinese Communist Party basically is like somebody described it a long time ago as like a cancer growing on top of the Chinese body politic, because you have to differentiate between the Chinese government, the Chinese people, and the party, which is actually a European invention. So Marx and Engels got picked up, and now they have their, quote, Chinese characteristics. But one of those is control. And for years, the Chinese Communist Party has been engaged in efforts to suppress and effectively to take over the Tibetan Buddhism. And so it's at least to me as a cradle Catholic, it's pretty appalling to see that my church made an agreement with the Communist Party, that they would allow them any voice whatsoever in choosing bishops. I mean, either the bishops are in apostolic succession with Peter, which means they're chosen within the church, or they're not. And so I don't even see how these bishops can be valid. And so what you're doing is you're creating a parallel church. And that's, as soon as that happens, the church isn't universal anymore. I'd go further, it's not even a church. I mean, it literally is what Jesus called a whitened sepulcher. It has all it looks great on the outside, but it's rotten on the inside. The Chinese Communist Party is a total system. And we know just from its behavior in other contexts, in commercial things, for example, they steal everything and turn it to their own ends. We know from the brutal surveillance of everything that they do in Xinjiang. We know from the organ harvesting that these people have no morals. And the idea that they would actually try and take over a church, and worse, at least again for me, that people in the Vatican, back when they made the agreement, would let them do it. Let's unpack a couple of things. I mean, the first thing is the persecution of the authentic church. Okay, because if you join the, quote, patriotic church, then you're part of the state and there's no persecution, but you're also not a church anymore. You have all the forms, but you don't have any of the substance, and so in terms of, and it's also true, it's not just with Catholics, it's with, with any type of Christian, that unless the state is completely in control, then it is, then they'll persecute you. I have a friend who was a Protestant pastor, he's a native Chinese speaker, and lived in Shenzhen for quite a while, and met with a kind of it wasn't really a house church, but constantly under surveillance, not simply because of what was in the sermons, but also because he had the audacity to be a foreigner who met with local Chinese. So what we're really talking about is control of, in information warfare, we're talking about control of information space, and that's what they're doing. And so it really just isn't a church anymore.
And the Vatican really sees or the Chinese Communist Party sees the Vatican as a foreign influence and has no plans to work together with the Vatican at all. There is no formal relationship between the Vatican and the China, correct, diplomatically, other than this deal.
No, I mean, and that's why this agreement doesn't make any sense. And there's another analogy in terms of a communist country. You can look at what the Russians did to the Russian Orthodox Church under Stalin. They basically co-opted it from the inside. But there's no doubt that at least the Russian Orthodox people are still Christians. And the question now is, I don't know what they teach in these patriotic churches, but my guess is it's not Christianity. Well, I think to the extent that the church becomes, a division of the works department, it basically becomes an engine for spreading communist ideology. It's not spreading the gospel; it's spreading the gospel of the party.
Thank you, Professor Destro. This is an extraordinarily helpful input into the motivations that are operating here and the travesty, really, that it is being enabled by the Catholic Church at the moment, unless there is, in fact, a course correction, as we are prayerful will be the case, especially in the run-up to the International Day of Prayer for the Catholic Church. We're going to hear next from a woman who starred in the documentary. She is with us live, for which we are very grateful, so we'll have a chance to have a discussion with her after her presentation. Her name is Elizabeth Yore. She has been a profoundly important activist, I believe, on a whole host of issues involving human freedom and the efforts of various entities, whether they're drug trafficking cartels or various governments, including, of course, notably the Chinese Communist Party, resisting what they're doing, calling them out for it, and where possible, including in her service in her state of Illinois, as well as at the federal level, bringing to bear the instruments of a civilized government to protect those who are being brutalized or otherwise persecuted. Liz Yore is the founder of an organization dedicated to those purposes now. It's called Your Children. And we're delighted to have her with us to talk a bit about this deal that Cardinal Pietro Parolin has brought forward, not only back in 2018, but again and again and again in the three re-uppings that have taken place since, and what it has done to bring us the papacy of Leo XIV. Liz, welcome. It's good to have you back. Thank you for all your help.
Thank you, Frank.
Over to you.
Thank you. It's great to be back. In 1948, a Maryknoll bishop by the name of James Walsh, shortly before his arrest and imprisonment by Mao, and his arrest was for 11 years in a Shanghai prison, he wrote to his superiors in Rome and in America, and he said, "Nobody has any illusion about the communist determination to eliminate all religion." Well, shockingly, we now know that the 2018 secret Vatican-China deal has done more to eliminate religion in China and really has furthered President Xi's goal to destroy all religion. But I'm given the wonderful question to ask and to answer: did the bad secret Vatican deal with China sink a papal conclave favorite? And I can happily say unequivocally the answer is yes. And I can also say that I believe, very firmly that because of the Committee on Present Danger China, as well as Save the Persecuted Christians, as well as this documentary and all the efforts to repeal the deal, had an enormous impact, that prior to the conclave, all the talk was about the bad China deal and how the conclave cardinals, electors, were going to deal with that. So I would argue that the top three contenders for Pope were actually scuttled because of their vocal support of the China deal. And the firestorm that we created on this documentary was so effective that the China deal really became the #1 issue in the conclave, and ultimately, I think, impacted the May 8th election. You know, Secretary of State Cardinal Parolin negotiated the 2018 secret deal. He renewed it 3 times. And as you've seen in the documentary, the results of the deal have been a disaster. And I like the words of Cardinal Zen from Hong Kong. It was a suicide pact, which the Catholic Church was turned over to the devil. And it's not just for Catholics that this deal was bad, but it was bad for all peoples of faith in China. And before the ink was dry on this 2018 deal, we saw that China ignored the deal, went ahead to appoint its own bishops without consulting or informing the Vatican and the Pope. Now, we've witnessed a demolition of churches, crucifixes, shrines, religious buildings, arrests, disappearances, imprisonments of Catholic laity, priests, and at least 10 Catholic bishops. You know, as recently as last year in 2024, the Human Rights Watch, the New York-based human rights watchdog, urged Pope Francis to exit the 2018 deal. And it stated, even when the agreement was first signed, it was clear that China under President Xi was highly repressive, including towards religious freedom. But Francis ignored the critics and extended the accord for another 4 years. And even China Aid, and I think this is important because this is not just against Catholic bishops and Catholic people of Catholic faith. China Aid, which is a Christian human rights organization, said at least 50 Protestant Christian pastors have been detained or sentenced in 2023, with 15 receiving prison terms of at least 5 years. This has been the impact of the China-Vatican deal on all members of faith. Well, with the death of Pope Francis on April 21st, the immediate and pressing question before the College of Cardinal Electors was, what is the impact of this disastrous agreement on the conclave? Will Cardinal Parolin pay the price for Beijing's having reneged on its bishop selections? Well, here we are in 2025 with 10 bishops missing and many being persecuted, and children not being allowed to attend any religious ceremony or events until after the age of 18. So when Pope Francis died, we faced this window of opportunity to end the vile deal, bring it front and center to the conclave, and demand that the deal be at the heart of the conclave negotiations and discussions by all the cardinals who assembled to elect. And we must note that Cardinal Parolin was the leading candidate for Pope, and it afforded an opportunity finally for religious freedom advocates in this very committee to shine the light on the disastrous consequences of this deal. Cardinal Parolin, I believe, by his virulent advocacy, was really toxic and became really tarnished in his attempt to ascend to the throne of Peter. Many people have now said and recognized that the deal was indefensible and is really a black stain on Cardinal Parolin and made him, in fact, unelectable. But interestingly, there were others who were supporting the China deal and others who were number 2 and 3 behind Parolin. Those were Philippine Cardinal Tagle and Italian Cardinal Matteo Zuppi. They all supported the secret Vatican deal. All 3 were resoundingly defeated. And I believe that this is a message of the death knell directly related from the China deal. Well, interestingly, in the run-up to the conclave, the 93-year-old retired Hong Kong Cardinal Zen attended these pre-conclave meetings, and it was reported, and I think this is very important, that he did not speak about the China deal, although, in my opinion, his presence spoke volumes to all the other cardinals. Well, the World Day of Prayer for China is going to focus all the people of faith around the world on the persecutions of Chinese people of faith. And I think it's important to remember the prophetic words of another Catholic cardinal who was imprisoned for 30 years and tortured by the CCP, Cardinal Ignatius Kung. He said the church in China has suffered severe persecution. We have been able to stand in the front line of the church. This is our glory. We should be glad and rejoice. What a great glory it is for us that we can cooperate with Christ in carrying out his work. The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. Well, folks, we have been successful thus far in bringing attention to this deal. Now we must double down since a new Pope, Pope Leo, has been elected, and we must speak with one united voice and demand that the Vatican-China deal be repealed, rescinded forthwith. It should be at the top of his agenda. There is not one iota of evidence or rational explanation to support its ongoing existence. Catholics, and not only Catholics, are watching. The entire world is watching closely with intense interest to see if Pope Leo has the courage, the bold faith to rip up this agreement. The die has been cast. It is blood red. China has made a mockery and a fool of the Vatican. So let us join hands and pray throughout the coming days for a total and complete repeal of the Vatican-China deal. And it will reverberate throughout the world, bringing hope to people of faith. Thank you.
Liz Yore, what a wonderful presentation and sort of exhortation to action. We're going to build on that theme here momentarily. We're going to hear, though, next from another of our contributors to the documentary, Benedict Rogers. He has unfortunately not been able to be with us in person on this occasion, virtually or otherwise, but he has, again, provided a very important contribution through an interview that we did with him for Securing America. And with his permission, we've edited it slightly to make it available for this purpose as well. Benedict is the founder and I guess the president of Hong Kong Watch. You can find out much more about it at hongkongwatch.org. He is a Catholic convert, a man of deep faith, and one who has personal insight into what it means when the Chinese Communist Party oppresses a people, because he has witnessed it in the city that I believe he's resided in for many years and certainly loves. And he's also witnessed its grievous, brutal mistreatment of individuals who have been active in resisting the Communist Party's predations, including notably a man he will speak about, Jimmy Lai, great freedom fighter. Let's go to Benedict's video at this point, please.
It's an extremely good thing that Cardinal Parolin was not elected Pope. We'll have to wait and see what approach Pope Leo takes, and I hope very much he will take a different approach. But certainly, I would say anyone would have been better than Cardinal Parolin, who was the architect of that deal. So that was a good outcome. Pope Leo definitely has an opportunity to shape things in a new direction. My understanding from people I've spoken to, although we'll have to wait and see, but my understanding is that Cardinal Parolin remains in his current role as Secretary of State of the Vatican for the time being, but it's quite likely, I understand, that Pope Leo will want a new Secretary of State in due course, and it's just a matter of time before he moves Parolin on. If that is the case, that will give him even more freedom to shape things in a different way. It's probably too early to say definitively, but one thing that Pope Leo said just a few days ago that gave me some cause for hope was he made a speech to the press corps in the Vatican where he spoke very passionately about the importance of press freedom, freedom of expression, journalists around the world who've been imprisoned. And he spoke generally, he didn't reference China specifically, but if he can speak passionately about freedom of the press and freedom of expression in general terms, then surely at some point he can do the right thing and speak out for example, Catholics like Jimmy Lai, a media entrepreneur in jail in Hong Kong. So those comments gave me some hope that we may begin to see a different approach. I think the fact that he made those remarks so early in his pontificate. Also, I think that his choice of name is very interesting because, of course, Leo XIII was the founding father, really, of Catholic social teaching. So that would imply a sympathy towards human rights, which, again, ought to lead to a different approach on China.
Speaking of human rights, you mentioned the terrible abuse to which Jimmy Lai, a great hero of, I know the people of Hong Kong and I think people who love freedom worldwide, what he's being subjected to by the Chinese Communist Party. Could you say a few words about his treatment in prison and his ongoing trials and tribulations of other kinds, and how it, in a way, epitomizes what's happening to the community of Hong Kong writ large?
Absolutely. Well, Jimmy Lai is 77 years old. He's actually a British citizen, although he's lived in Hong Kong most of his life. He could have left Hong Kong at any point before his arrest. He has properties in several cities around the world. He's a very wealthy man, but he chose to stay in Hong Kong and defend the fight for freedom, knowing that he could end up in jail. He has been in prison for 4.5 years, more than 1,500 days so far, on multiple charges, including charges of lighting a candle to commemorate the Tiananmen Square massacre, joining a peaceful protest. But he still hasn't actually been convicted or sentenced under the biggest charge he faces, which is under the national security law. We expect that trial to conclude later this year, and he faces a minimum of 10 years and the possibility of life. So he's very likely to die in jail, given his age and the length of the sentences. He's in solitary confinement. He's denied the right to receive Holy Communion. He has about 50 minutes a day of exercise, so he's in his cell more than 23 hours a day. And he's diabetic, and he's not receiving the medical care that he needs and deserves.
Well, this is a cause to which Pope Leo should address himself directly and urgently, and hopefully as part of this idea that he is not going to continue Pope Francis's practice of turning a blind eye to all of it and thereby appeasing the CCP. So just to put a fine point on what we've just heard, a man who exemplifies Roman Catholicism in China, albeit a man of enormous wealth and at one point power, is being essentially murdered slowly, cruelly, in isolation in a Chinese prison for the crime of lighting a candle in solidarity with those who yearn for freedom in Hong Kong and beyond. His trials are not over, as Benedict has said. They are continuing, and he is yet another reminder of what the church is doing in turning a blind eye to such egregious behavior is wrong. And to just emphasize that point, that is how Pope Francis conducted himself with respect to all of the crimes against humanity. of the Chinese Communist Party, and why course correction again is so urgently needed with respect to this secret deal with the CCP. We're going to hear finally from a woman who has introduced the program, as she usually does, who participated wonderfully in the documentary, and who is incalculably important to all of the efforts we make with the Committee on the Present Danger China, of which she is the executive secretary, and Save the Persecuted Christians, of which she is the executive director. That is, of course, Didi Laugesen. We've asked Didi to talk a bit about a campaign that we are launching with this webinar, a prayer for the church in China and all believers, a novena and campaign for Pope Leo to repeal the deal. Didi, welcome. Over to you.
Thank you, Frank. I'm so glad to be here. And if I have too many hats to wear, it's all because of America's greatest patriot, Frank Gaffney. So thank you. I'm so glad to be here with all of you today. As executive director of Save the Persecuted Christians, I am a Catholic who leads a very large group of human rights experts and academia and others who are concerned about the persecution of Christians worldwide. And we are all kinds of flavors of Christianity. So I can say that it is really a wonderful thing to be able to come together as a Christian, as a Catholic, with people who may not be Catholic, but who still feel the need to pray for what's happening to the Catholic Church in China. In order to keep people engaged and prepare, we are doing 9 days of prayer for the Catholic Church in China. It's a prayer movement to inspire Pope Leo XIV to have a change of heart on the agreements made with the Chinese Communist Party. The Vatican's World Day of Prayer for the Church in China is May 24th. And as Frank explained earlier, Catholics love to pray novenas, 9 days of prayer leading up to something big, so that we really can just immerse ourselves in prayer and unite ourselves in solidarity with the very faithful Chinese Catholics who have been put into such a predicament because of this deal. They were happy, Frank and Liz, and everybody here knows they were joyful in their suffering. And for Catholicism, suffering is key to one's spiritual journey, as Jesus set the example and told us that if we wish to be his disciple, we ought to pick up our cross daily and follow after him, and that no slave is greater than his master. We are going to suffer as Christians in this world, but that's a joyful thing when you know that your suffering is for Christ Jesus. And so under the patronage of St. Joseph, who was officially named the patron saint of China in 1924, this Repeal the Deal novena seeks to uplift Chinese Catholics facing persecution and suppression under the Chinese Communist Party, and to encourage the Holy See to be reconciled and reunited with the long-suffering Chinese Catholics who are now experiencing increased persecution, alienation, and confusion as a consequence of this deal. The Catholic Church in China, with its roots back to the 1600s, faces an ongoing campaign by the CCP to isolate Chinese Catholics from Rome and to establish a state-controlled patriotic church. These measures, like property expropriation, surveillance, propaganda, being told on by your neighbors, maybe even your children, as children in China are not allowed to practice worship or learn any new faith. So we ask you to pray with us for the next 9 days, starting today. We've set themes for each day: strengthen endurance today, for Chinese Catholics to find courage and hope in Christ amidst persecution and restrictions. And then throughout the 9 days, we have other themes and prayer intentions that you can ponder as you offer the prayers. You'll find these prayers at repealthedeal.org. And it's just a really great way to draw inspiration, and especially from Cardinal Ignatius Kung, who Liz mentioned before. He endured decades of torture for refusing to renounce the Pope. And his words resonate so deeply with me. To separate from the sole representative of Jesus Christ on earth, the Roman pontiff, is to make myself losing the most basic Catholic faith, becoming a heretic without the Pope. And he stayed strong in his faith, and Catholic Christians were persevering and growing in faith and increasing in numbers before this deal. So there really isn't a reason for the deal to be here because of that. This initiative underscores the universal call to stand for truth. As Dom Guéranger, a Benedictine monk hailed for restoring monasticism in France after the French Revolution, reminds us, when the faith is compromised by someone in authority in the church, the true Christian is the one who makes a stand for the truth. So join us in the prayer movement to reveal and repeal the deal at repealthedeal.org. And thanks so much for praying with us over the next 9 days.
Didi, thank you. And thank you most especially for your leadership in all of these areas. I wanted to open this up to a little bit of back and forth. We don't have a lot of time, but I do want to ask both of you questions. Liz, first, do you tell us a little bit about Pope Leo and whether, given what we know of him, his previous life experience, notably his long service in the nation of Peru, he may be susceptible to persuasion on this score, or whether there may be sufficient loyalty to the man whose patronage brought him to this high office, Pope Francis, that he may feel unable to essentially repudiate the legacy that marked his papacy.
We're all trying to read the papal tea leaves, Frank. And Pope Leo, Robert Prevost, like myself, born and raised in Illinois in the Chicago area. He spent 20 of his years as a missionary in Peru. He is of the Augustinian order. And he has been in a number of positions of leadership in the Augustinian order, provincial and otherwise. Recently, about 2 years ago, he was named a cardinal by Pope Francis. So he is what we call a baby cardinal, and was also placed in charge of the dicastery for the bishops, which is a huge job, not only vetting and appointing bishops, but also investigating bishops. So he's been at the Vatican for about 2 years. Unfortunately, he's made no comments about the China deal. And it had to have been the topic of a lot of conversations in the last month in the Vatican. But he's an American. So we're assuming that he's going to hear our voices even more loudly and clearly than the previous Pope did. And especially on this issue, because as you pointed out, and so rightly true, he's a big proponent of freedom of speech, encouraging journalists to speak out boldly. And so I would think and hope and pray that he would see the China deal for what it was. Obviously, it's going to take enormous amount of courage to do so, to repeal this deal. But it's one that I think the Western world, actually the entire world outside of China, really is encouraging him to do so. So we'll see, no indications yet. So we're going to continue to hammer this issue as vociferously, kindly, and persuasively as we can.
Could I just ask you to expand on that? Because were he to take, as you say, the risk, I guess, of seemingly challenging or even repudiating Pope Francis's legacy, there will be possible criticism headed his way. But on the other hand, if he chooses not to do so, especially with one of his first official acts being praying for the church in China and leading, a world prayer to that end, surely the costs associated with that in terms of his reputation, in terms of branding his infant papacy, baby cardinal and all, would be vastly greater, would they not?
Yeah, it's going to overshadow his papacy almost immediately, Frank. And quite frankly, there is no compromise, as we all know, with the CCP. It's either repeal or continue to deal with the increased violations. And I would expect that there will be some, if he does repeal the deal, clearly the whole world, from the far left, Amnesty International, religious freedom groups, all of them in one voice have said this is a disaster, that this deal needs to be repealed. So in many respects, Frank, it's a no-brainer, but you're taking on the powerful CCP. And there will be a counter reaction, I would imagine, in China. But I think it's a moment of bravery. I'm hoping that he does it during his honeymoon period, while there's a lot of goodwill. And hopefully he will have a strong Secretary of State who will articulate all the violations and all the reasons why this deal needs to be repealed. And, I have said this once, I'm going to say it again. I feel that all the terms must be revealed. I feel very strongly that the Vatican owes an apology to every Catholic, Christian, person of faith in China as a result of this deal. So it's, and as I said, it's got to be way up there on his agenda to deal with as quickly as possible.
And again, Leslie, to you, Liz, is there reason, is there reason to believe that there are other provisions to this deal besides the ones that have been made known, again, not disclosed, but have clearly been in play as they relate to the appointment of bishops? For example, there is some rumor to the effect that there was a considerable amount of money that may have changed hands from the Chinese Communist Party to the Vatican. It is in financial distress, the Vatican, that is. Well, so is the Chinese Communist Party, last time I checked. But what else do we think is in this deal?
Well, there has been the rumor that starting in 2014, the Chinese Communist Party gave a grant of $2 billion a year to the Vatican. Many believe that paid off Pope Francis to remain silent over the Uyghurs, over the forced organ donors, over the ongoing persecution of Christians. There's no other explanation of why he would have been quiet as a result of that. And frankly, we don't know what else is in the deal. Those terms could really rock the Catholic Church. So in addition to the appointment and collaboration of appointment of Catholic bishops, there could be the payment of money. There could be all sorts of agreements, side agreements that we are unaware of. That the whole file dossier on the China deal needs to be opened up. And by the way, Frank, there were 3 renewals of that agreement. We don't even know if there were additional terms changed in those renewals. So there's a lot of questions to be asked and answered, and we have got to move past this. And I think the impact on China would be extraordinary. that the Catholic Church would stand up to Xi's government and really expose it for violating the terms, not being a fair and honest partner. Can you imagine the impact that would have on the world, on global affairs? But we, as I said, we got to pray and we've got to force this issue because it could very easily be pushed aside despite everything that's happened.
I want to come back to you on that point, but before we do, Dee Dee, again, thank you for your help in conceiving of and really putting into place key elements of a campaign to enlist the largest possible outpouring of prayer and encouragement to Pope Leo XIV to rescind this deal, reveal its terms too, as Liz said, but to dispense with it going forward so that it isn't an affliction on his papacy. But I'd like to get your thoughts on why it is that the Chinese Communist Party view Christians as such a threat as to require this kind of oppression and effort to, well, not just co-opt, but really to destroy the Catholic Church and other faith institutions.
When Sinicization began in China under Mao Zedong, it really had to do with imperialism and foreign influences. And that has never changed under Chinese leaders. Indeed, that is why the CCP named 2 bishops just shortly after Francis's death, when nothing was supposed to be going on other than the cardinals gathering in Rome. So they totally, and even after Pope Francis died, the Chinese Catholic Patriotic Association posted to their website a notice of his death at the very bottom of the page with only 2 lines and nothing else. They didn't make a statement. They didn't send a representative. The Chinese Catholic or the Chinese communists have no intention of dealing with the Vatican directly. They are leading the way, and the Vatican is on their knees caving to communists, atheist communists. It's completely, it just boggles the mind that we find ourselves in this situation, Frank.
It is, and makes all the more important, again, the efforts that we're talking about here. And Dee Dee, in terms of the interfaith aspects of this, the novena is, of course, a particular characteristic of the Catholic Church. But how is it that these efforts that we're talking about might benefit in addition and deserve the faith participation of people like those championing Tibetan Buddhists, Uyghur Muslims, the Falun Gong practitioners, and the like?
Frank, Xi Jinping and his bully party are the worst abusers of human rights in the world towards, and their abuse is directed primarily at religion, because no thing can come between a communist and its subject. There cannot be a God above that they can place their hope in and turn their attention to. Xi Jinping wants the worship due to Christ alone for himself. The Chinese communists are right now committing genocide against the Uyghur Muslims, who we have advocated for tremendously in the past. We've seen what has happened to the Tibetan Buddhists. Nobody ever talks about what's happened to Southern Mongolians who have lost their language and everything that made them who they are. Because under communism, everything is bland, everything is gray, everything is equalized, nothing stands apart from another, and the only thing to be elevated is Xi Jinping himself. So they're going hard. You mentioned, going after the Bible, the story where Jesus, tells those who've gathered to stone a woman who has been found sinning, to those who haven't sinned to cast the first stone, and they all leave. Well, instead, in China, they've rewritten the scripture in curriculum to tell the story that Jesus stoned the woman herself, and in the commandments, they've removed the first commandment. There is no other God but God alone. You should not worship anything but God alone. So they are there, and you can't buy a Bible in China online anymore at all. And to seek out a Bible, it's terrible. So we try to take a look at all of those who have been persecuted, and the Protestant church in China is massive and growing still, but they go after them too. And every single person who follows some form of faith or belief in China automatically gets a lower social credit score. You're at risk for not being able to rent housing, of being thrown out of schools, of not getting jobs, of being surveilled and harassed, and even turned in by your neighbors, and possibly detained and having your organs harvested. This isn't just the Uyghurs to whom this is happening to. China is a dark box. And since May 1st, no foreigner can participate in China with a Chinese citizen for any religious purpose whatsoever at all. So it truly is a dark black box. We have no idea what's going on in there, other than that we know that the crucifixes have been torn down and replaced with Xi Jinping. We know that bishops and clergy are mandated to promulgate the doctrines of the CCP and not the Catholic Church. So the Vatican has given this deal and given legitimacy to these clerics who, as I said in the documentary, travel the world. Cardinal Stephen Chow was at Boston University in December giving the commencement speech. And so we see this is pernicious, and it is something that absolutely must come to an end.
Back to you, Liz. This is such an important point, and I wanted to just underscore what Trevor Loudon said in the documentary and on our webinar previously, of course, about the Chinese communists moving the sort of organizational placement of this so-called Progressive Catholic Association from an entity within the government of China, the state government, if you will. Bad as that is, to a placement as a element or a subsidiary of the United Front Work Department of the Chinese Communist Party, whose explicit purpose is to run influence operations, to subvert others, to try to advance the interests of the Chinese Communist Party by essentially destroying those who stand in the way. Could you comment on the significance of that, and how, again, I just want to bring this back to what is the choice before Pope Leo? Is he going to endorse these arrangements? Is he going to explicitly countenance the church being party to them in the future, including all of the things that Didi's just talking about? I mean, my head explodes at the idea that the image of Jesus Christ on the cross is being removed and replaced by the image of Xi Jinping in any church. It's unspeakable, really.
It is.
But talk a little bit about the extent to which this is a choice for the pontiff of the First Order, is it not?
It is. What has happened is a usurpation of the Catholic Patriotic Church, and the faithful Catholic underground church has been crushed, and any resemblance of a Catholic church has now been taken over by the political party, the United Workers Front in China. So it has become a tool, as was warned 70 years ago, that the Patriotic Church is a fraud. It is a tool of the Communist Party to absolutely erase all religion. And Frank and Dee Dee have also pointed out that this has been a slow, gradual, but make no mistake, intentional movement towards the elimination of all the issues, the devotions, the religious ceremonies, the practices of the Catholic faith. It has been slow and steady. But first and foremost, what did they do? The communists are so smart. First and foremost, any priest, any bishop who refused to join the Patriotic Church was immediately ripped out of their vocation, sent home, taken their pension, everything else has been taken away from them. Many have had to flee. Many have been on the street because it was an either or situation. Secondly, what is extremely concerning to me is that the CCP appointed bishops and cardinals are now embedded in the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. Think about that. I mean, this is beyond anybody's wildest imagination. And if this deal is allowed to continue, they will continue to grow and appoint more cardinals who will be part of the College of the Cardinals, who will become the men who choose the next pope. And so it's a two-pronged thing. They've not only embedded in the Vatican, but they have also gutted the Catholic faith in China and taken it over. And now what's happening is the absolute crushing of the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Patriotic Church has become this just mere ministerial tool of the United Front. And so it is absolutely urgent that we make this line of demarcation, because and it's, quite frankly, look, this is a spiritual battle. This is, the Catholic Church face to face with the Communist Party. And are we going to blink? Is this new Pope going to blink and continue to allow the atheistic, godless Communist Party to choose our leaders, the successors of Peter? I mean, clearly, that's not an exaggeration. It has happened. And so it couldn't be more stark. And he's going to have to make a decision. And that will really measure the man, I believe. But we need to continue to create create the stark decision making that needs to be done immediately, and to lay out all the facts as Dee Dee has. And these are the facts we know because they've leaked out from China. We don't have many eyes on China about the persecution. What we hear is terrifying. So Catholics, Christians are well aware of the spiritual battle ahead of us. And this one, it seems to me, is one that we can no longer blink or ignore. It's time to step up in the breach and speak truth to power and demand that Pope Leo do the right thing for the church. In the history of the great martyrs in the Catholic Church of China, who knew what the communists were like, who didn't blink, who were so brave and so fearless. There's one story about Cardinal Kung, who was in prison for 30 years, tortured, solitary confinement. Most Catholics thought he was dead. And when he was finally released, they asked him, "Were you tortured?" And this humble, beautiful, faithful man never lost the faith, and said, I'm not going to talk about torture. That's between God and myself. I mean, that's the kind of people that we are fighting for. And that is embedded in the soul of China. The Cardinal Kungs, the Bishop Walshes, the Cardinal Zens, these are the men that we need to step up and defend the Church of Jesus Christ.
Amen. Beautifully said, Liz. Didi, just last and quickly, how can people find out more about, well, the documentary, where they can share it, as well as the novena and other efforts that the Repeal the Deal movement is making now to exhort Pope Leo XIV to change course?
Everything is at repealthedeal.org, repealthedeal.org. We have an incredible social media kit there with very creative memes by Oleg Edbashian, our colleague here, and sample social media posts, other resources, all kinds of articles that you can read to protest with us online. Everybody everywhere can join the protest online, and we make it so simple with our social media toolkit. We have the Align Act that has been spoken of before, where Americans can reach to President Trump and their elected representatives in Congress to ask them to also make bold statements about the need for this deal to be repealed. And we have a global petition as well, where anyone anywhere can sign on to a petition that will be sent to Pope Leo XIV. And we're coming up with the more things that people can do every day, Frank, and including the most important thing, which is to pray. Whatever your faith, whatever your belief, we're all united in the common respect for the dignity of each human person and their right under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to worship freely and to transmit that faith to their children. So please join us for 9 days of prayer in advance of the Vatican's World Day of Prayer for the Church in China. Join us to pray just resoundingly, because we do believe that as Catholics, that it is the Holy Spirit who moves the Pope, who chose the Pope and who moves the Pope. And we really do hope and pray that this Pope Leo is a holy Pope united to that Holy Spirit and has the courage to act now while he is in his first 100 days.
Thank you, Didi. Thank you, Liz. Thank you to Benedict Rogers and, of course, to Robert Destro, as well as all of the others who were featured in the documentary. We are privileged to be part of this epic moment in the history of not just the Roman Catholic Church, but of religious freedom and tolerance, and urge that all of you, especially those of you who have come to this program because of your concern about what the Chinese Communist Party is up to, and to appreciate that what is going on here is indeed, as Liz Yours just said, spiritual warfare between good and evil. We must have in Pope Leo XIV a man who will prove himself right out of the gate to be a leader for good, and not someone who is prepared, as did his predecessor, to subordinate his Catholic Church to evil incarnate. We pray indeed for his rising to this occasion and for the grace that I believe will attend it, should he do so. I want to thank all of you for being with us and for, I hope, as I'm fond of saying, going forth and multiplying. God bless you, and God bless Pope Leo XIV. Back to you, Didi.
Thank you, Frank. A video of this webinar will be posted to repealthedeal.org and our coalition websites within a day of our program's conclusion. Please share this and our other programs with your elected representatives, colleagues, and other networks. For webinar notices for the Committee on the Present Danger China, updates and news, subscribe to our Substack at presentdangerchina.substack.com and follow us on X at CPD China, where you'll also find short video clips that can be shared from the documentary. Join us again next week for another installment of our Committee on the Present Danger China webinar series on the CCP's unrestricted warfare against America and the free world, and how the CCP captured elites betray the USA. Thanks again for joining us, and goodbye.